David Doyle arrived at Campbell in 1983 from Dublin, Ireland, by way of Henderson, North Carolina. 4 years later, he not only graduated, but became the first Campbell men's soccer player to earn NCAA Division I All-America honors. The nation's leading scorer in 1986 with a school D1 era record 34 goals, David was named Big South Player of the Year. He went on to play professional indoor soccer and after a 19-year career was inducted into the Indoor Soccer Hall of Fame. In 2006, David was inducted into the Campbell Athletics Hall of Fame and was enshrined in the Big South Hall of Fame in 2015. My name is Stan Cole, class of 1987, and this is the next installment of Tales from the Creek, where we visit with people who've made this place special over the years. I'm delighted today to be joined by Campbell soccer great David Doyle. Welcome to Tales from the Creek, David, and thanks for taking time to visit with us.
Thanks for having me, Stan. It's a pleasure to do this podcast with you.
David, let's just start out at the beginning. Tell us about your life growing up in Ireland and how you got started in soccer, or as the sport is known in the rest of the world, football.
Well, I mean, when you talk, I listened to Shawnee, and he basically explained everything that we did. We just played soccer in the grass, and then when it got dark, we played on the streets. And then you had your local team you played for, and if you were lucky enough, the better teams would come try to get you to go to a higher league, a better team. And if you were lucky, you got selected for the Dublin team or the Irish youth teams. But it was very simple, nothing special.
So just kind of pick up soccer there in the neighborhood after school?
Yeah, we would come home, we'd throw our book bags in the house, and we'd go play till it was time for dinner. And then when dinner was over, you went back out and you played again. And then when the lights came on, you went home during the school year anyway.
Did you play any other sports growing up?
Yeah, I played hurling and Gaelic football, which are two traditional Irish sports that are played there. But for the school, I didn't play them outside of school. But I was decent, but I knew football was the one thing I wanted to do.
Any other interests? Was it mainly sports in school, or what?
It was just school and football. That was it.
Wow. What were who were some of your heroes, soccer heroes growing up?
Well, I was a Manchester United fan, so I loved to watch George Best, Dennis Law, Bobby Charlton, and then obviously there was some Irish players that were pretty good. Liam Brady was really good back in the day, but we didn't see much football on television back then. We had one live game a year, which was the FA Cup final. And so you didn't get to see them much, but when you did, you enjoyed watching them.
Shawnee explained to me when we did his podcast that his older brothers were Leeds United fans, and therefore he had no choice except to be a Leeds supporter. Was that kind of the way it was in your house? How did people choose their teams? If you were, you're growing up in Ireland, and most of the teams were maybe English.
Yeah, I mean, the Irish league back then, it was more of it was semi-professional, and there were some decent players there. But back in the day, most of the Irish best players ended up in England. Our household was a Manchester United household, so you couldn't get away with supporting anybody else, and so that's how it started.
Folks our age remember the troubles in Ireland. Was that something that was on your mind growing up in the 70s and early 80s?
Well, I mean, it was on your mind all the time because every night the news came on, there was the headline, the first headline in the newscast was there was a bombing in Belfast or a shooting in Belfast, and a Catholic killed a Protestant or a Protestant killed a Catholic. And you knew the next night there'd be some kind of retaliation. But I mean, it came down to Dublin once when one Friday 3 bombs went off in Dublin, and that's the only time basically the troubles made our way down to us.
Right.
But it was always on your mind, yes.
Right. So you've started high school, and your parents decide to send you to the States as an exchange student. How did that come about? Tell us about that process.
Well, I left school when I was 15,
Mm-hmm.
and I was working in a a gas station as under a guy to be an apprentice mechanic. Why? I had no interest in cars, but it was just something I thought, no, because you can have a skip year. You can skip your 4th year and then you could go back to 5th year. So if I didn't like it, I could just go back and finish up school.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the lads I was hanging out with said, hey, Mickey Whelan, who was a teacher down in the school I was at, said he wants to talk to you. And I was like, okay. And I went down and talked to him, and he says, well, I talked to your dad. And I was like, and so when you go home, ask him what we talked about. So I went home and I was eating dinner and I totally forgot about it. And then I just remembered, hey, what did Mickey Whelan, you went down and talked to Mickey Whelan today? And he goes, yeah. I said, what did he say? He said, well, he wanted to know if you wanted to go to America on a scholarship. And I was shocked. I didn't know what it was. And I said, what does that entail? And he gave me some information, but he said, you need to go down and talk to him and see what it's about. So I went down and talked to the teacher, and he explained to me where I was going and what I'd be doing and what it was like. And so, the conversation with my mom and dad was, they didn't want me to go. I was too young. And I asked Mickey Whelan, I said, why did you pick me? And he said, well, I felt, because he had done that. He'd gone to school over here. And he said, well, I've been around you for 3 years, and I feel like you have the temperament, and I think you can handle the situation. And he said, but the one thing is, if you don't like it, they'll send you home. So it's not like you'll be stuck there. And so that was, but my parents still didn't want me to go. And finally, my dad went down to see him again, and he asked him the question, if it was your son, what would you do? And Mickey Whelan replied, well, knowing where he's going and the people he's going to be with, he said, I'd send my son tomorrow. And my dad came back and said, well, it's your choice if you want to go. And so every day was different. I was going, I was not going, I was going. And I remember Shawnee saying this, is the one thing is I didn't want to have any regrets later on in life. If I didn't go, I'd always wonder what if. At least if I went and didn't like it, I went and I didn't like it. And it just so happened I liked it. I'm still here.
So tell us about, Dublin, Ireland to Henderson, North Carolina, and what, your host family situation, your school. What were some of the culture shocks? What were some of the things that made you feel comfortable and want to stay?
Well, I knew going in that I'd probably be homesick for the first few weeks, always thinking about, well, if I was at home, what would I be doing now? I'd be doing this, doing that. So I knew I kind of told myself, I'll give it to Christmas and see how it is. And if it's okay, then if it's not, then like you said, you can always send me home. But it was a bit of a culture shock because there was no football on the streets. There was no, everybody lived, because I went to a private school, everybody lived all over the place. So you really couldn't go out the door and knock the neighbor, hey, you want to come out and play? Or because and of course I didn't drive, so I couldn't drive anywhere. And, the kids were great. The guys I ended up playing with in high school and hanging out with, they took me in and made me feel welcome. And so they made it a lot easier for the transition. And then obviously school started. I got here on July 29th, 1981. And school started a couple of weeks later. So getting into the school routine quickly kind of took your mind off of stuff back home, and it just flowed from there. It was pretty easy for me to do, actually, I think.
What were some of the biggest adjustments to coming to the States? Just familiarity, or do you have anything that you got here and said, wow, that food is not for me? Or
well, the host family did a, so you like potatoes? And I said, yeah, I'm basically just a meat and potato guy, but they slowly got me on all the foods that, that we weren't exposed to over there. They said, well, try this and try that. And so my menu grew as each time I stayed there. So, but yeah, some of the things were we had some preppy dudes that had yellow pants and green pants, and I was like, if my mates ever saw me in green pants, green Izod pants with a yellow Izod shirt and a green belt, they'd probably disown me. But you just adjusted and fitted into what they were doing, and I think that was the biggest thing, was I was able to adjust into their culture real quick and real easy.
Shawnee mentioned that he had some good teammates and then some guys that tried hard, and that the level was kind of off center, or just unbalanced a little bit in practices, but played against some good teams. And one of the teams you played against had two of your future college teammates on it. Vance against Wilson Greenfield, Beatty Clark, Chris Gauss down there at Greenfield. You got to know those guys. You and Beatty were both high school All-Americans. Tell us a little bit about that rivalry with Greenfield and Vance.
Yeah, I mean, we were in the Coastal Conference or something, private school conference, and obviously I didn't know what to stand. I knew after practicing with the kids that I was playing with that the level wasn't as good as obviously where I came from, but we still had some very, very good players, considering how young soccer was here back then. And so my first three high school games were on Taylor Field in the high school tournament that they had down here, and Tim obviously seen them and kept an eye on me. But so the lads would tell me who the good teams were. Yeah, Ravenscroft are good, and Greenfield are good, and so when we played them, they were games that were tough games, and everybody knew who Beatty was and Gauss was, and Lee Horton, who ended up being our assistant for a few years here, he was the head coach at Greenfield Academy. So it was good. I mean, the teams, like I said, there were some not so good teams, but there was 3 or 4, and then when you got into playoffs, Durham Academy beat us in the state final at Duke my first year. But so there were some good teams around.
David, tell us a little bit about the process. You mentioned your first 3 high school games were at Campbell. The coach, Tim Morse, would have been in his first year as a head coach here and at Campbell. Tell us a little bit about the recruiting process and some of the schools you heard from, and where and why you ultimately chose Campbell.
Well, I had no idea about college, when I got here, and then people said, well, do you want to go to college here? And I was like, well, what do you mean college? What is that? I knew there was college in Ireland, but I didn't know. Very rarely did people that we grew up with went to college. They just went and got a job when they were out of school, and that was it. And then as my first year of high school went on, and we were a good team, obviously, and scoring lots of goals, I start getting these letters, and I would ask them, what are these letters from? And they said, they're from schools that have seen you play and want you to come play for them. I mean, there was tons of them, and I didn't know half the places. They had to tell me where this school was, where that school was, and what it was like. And so in my senior year, I decided, well, maybe I'll give it a go. Just the same thing. Give it a go for a year. If I like it, I'll stay. If I don't, I can always go home. And I was recruited by Carolina. And I went on a visit to Chapel Hill, and I met with the coach, Anson Dorrance. I met one player, which I thought was weird. And I had told him in our previous phone calls that I cannot go to school here on anything less than a full scholarship, because there's no way we can afford it. And he was like, oh, no problem, no problem. And so when I went on my visit, I walked around Chapel Hill, and we went back to his office, and we were talking, and he said, well, we're offering you everything but board. And I just looked at him, and I said, but I can't go to school for everything but board. I have to have a full ride. Well, that's what we have right now. And so I left his office and I went to Carmichael Auditorium and watched Carolina Duke basketball game with Michael Jordan as a freshman. And that was the best part of the visit. And then I think the following Tuesday, it was during spring, right before spring break, Tim shows up at school at Vance Academy and out of the blue. And I talked to Tim and he said, "Why don't you come for a visit?" So me and the goalkeeper at our school, Eddie Sharon, he wanted to come here too. So we drove down and we got here about 10 o'clock, something like that, and met Tim in the old athletic office over there by the old tennis courts. And he says, "Okay, come on. We're going." He took me to Scotty Scarborough and Johnny Reed's room. He says, "Here you go. You're with them till I'll see you at Marshbanks for lunch." And they took me to class. They introduced me to all the players. I got to see the campus. And then I talked to, after that, I talked to Tim and a bunch of players came over to meet me and Eddie at the table. You know, it wasn't like Carolina where you met one player and that was it. And so I talked to Tim before we left, and he said, "Listen, we've never done a full scholarship, but if you want to come here, we'll give you a full ride." So I went back and talked to the people I was staying with at the time, and, you know, they were they were Carolina people, you know, so they didn't push me either way. They said, "Look, you got to do what you think is best." And so I think it was the Thursday before spring break, I called Tim and I said, "Okay, I'll come." So he faxed me the letter of intent, and I faxed it back to him, and then I went on spring break. And when we got back from spring break, there was like 10 messages from Anson Dorrance on the answer machine. I didn't want to call him back because I thought he was but the people said, "Well, you need to call him back and tell him." And so I called him, and he says, "I heard you signed for Campbell." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, we're offering you full ride now." I said, "Well, you know, I told you from the beginning what was needed, and obviously you didn't think I was good enough for a full ride, so I signed for Campbell, and that's it. I'm not changing my mind." And so I came here.
David, I always found it interesting when we were in school together, we graduated the same class, that the men's soccer team had, you know, a great mix of folks. Did it feel more comfortable to you having some European players, international players, and then, you know, about the same amount of, domestic players? You had the Scarborough brothers who were from Bowie's Creek, and all of them were key players that played a big role on the team for 7 or 8 years in a row. And then you had people as far flung like Taha from Kuwait, and yourself from Ireland and Belgium and Denmark and all over the place. Was that a factor in the comfort level for you guys?
Don't forget the Scots.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it was good, you know, having Peter McCormick and Nesbitt here, David Nesbitt, being Scottish, we could relate a lot more to things at home. I mean, I'd played with a bunch of American kids in high school, so it wasn't like it was the main factor, but it was comfortable to be able to talk about home situations, and Peter would get the newspapers some weeks from the Sunday games. I would get them some weeks, and we'd share them when we talk about it and things like that. But it was comforting a little bit, but it wasn't hard to get along with them all, because we had good players, we had a good team, we had great support, and you know, it did make things easier that you felt a lot more comfortable around the group.
Your first 3 years you played, Campbell played soccer until 1986 on Old Taylor Field, the baseball field, and part of the field would have the infield cut out, the dirt part on one corner of it. Tell us a little bit about, and for those people who never got the opportunity to attend a game at Taylor Field, what it was like playing there on a I don't want to say makeshift, because it was the field for you guys, but it always felt like a home field advantage.
It did. I mean, the grass on the pitch was great. It wasn't like a dirt patch everywhere, But the biggest advantage we had was the place was packed every night we played, or every afternoon we played, and everybody was very close to the field. And especially at night games when we played the likes of Carolina and Duke and stuff, the place was rocking, and the field wasn't full size as you would normally get, like the one now, but which was an advantage to us because supposedly the better teams could spread us out a little more, whereas on Taylor Field we could stay more compact and we were hard to break down. So, but the atmosphere was brilliant at that place, and I kind of wish we'd have played all 4 years there because it would have been but I used to get stick from Mike Little, God rest his soul, and Scotty and other players. He said, why do you never end up in the dirt side of the field? Because when we played towards the swimming pool, I was always drifting out to the right, and we played towards the other end. I would drift to the left, so I would stay away from the dirt. And so they would get annoyed at me sometimes in a fun way. But no, it was just a brilliant place to play. Like the atmosphere was, like you said, was an advantage to us, and it ended up where Duke and Carolina wouldn't come play us at night our junior and senior year because they knew they were coming into a hostile environment.
Are there any particular games that stand out in your mind when, I know there was one time early on when Duke was ranked number 1 in the country and y'all had a tough battle that you ended up losing, but it was I happened to be across campus at tennis tryouts, but we could hear the crowd roaring. It was a midweek afternoon game, and all the tennis players were upset that they couldn't be at the soccer match that afternoon.
Yeah, well, because we had played Duke in the spring the previous year, and you don't play your outgoing seniors,
right?
But they played their outgoing seniors because their seniors were trying out for the Olympic team or Pan American. I don't know, and I guess John Rennie and Tim agreed to let their seniors play to keep them, and we beat them. We beat them that afternoon in Durham. And like a week later, Tim got a call from John Rennie. He said, "We're not coming down to the creek next year at night. We're going to come in the afternoon." So that just tells you how fearful they were of us playing at night. And there was a few games, like I think it was one of my first games was against NC State, and they were number 4 in the country, and we beat them 3-2 here. And games against Carolina, we drew with them 3-3. Some guy had to be told to get back off the sideline. I don't know who that was, but referee, but maybe that was you, Stan. But a lot of the night games, all the night games, Wednesday night games were incredible. The atmosphere, because the place was packed, because it was the only thing going on campus. So everybody, and when we knew everybody. The basketball team was there, both basketball teams, the baseball team, softball team, and all the students. And then obviously we as a team, we went and supported the basketball team and the softball team and the baseball team. So everybody came to everybody's games to create that atmosphere. So it was good.
David, your sophomore year was the first season the Big South Conference held a tournament. Camels win that one. Your junior year, win the Big South tournament. When did y'all start feeling the rivalries within the conference? I know it's hard to build those immediately, but what were some of the teams that y'all kind of looked out for when you played them in the league and knew that you might be facing them in the semifinals or final?
I think to begin with, the Radford and Winthrop were that first year were big rivals. They were the better teams. And then the last 2 years, Coastal Carolina became a big rival. They had a lot of Finnish? Icelandic kids.
Jamaican.
Yes. And so they became basically our main rival the last 2 years. And it's still the one regret I have is we lost our last game on the new field to Coastal in the conference final for 3 in a row.
It felt in those days, and then in the years to follow, before Campbell left for the Atlantic Sun Conference in 1994, that the Coastal Carolina game, in whatever sport it was, maybe it was proximity, maybe because Campbell and Coastal were two of the better teams in a broad range of sports, there was always a focal point driven to that one, which I think is what creates rivalry, when there's competition and maybe a little bit of animosity between the schools.
Yeah, I mean, you need those. You need those rivalries. It's good for the conference. It's good for you to know that you can't, every game you play, if you slip up against somebody you shouldn't have slipped up against, that Coastal are down the road and they haven't slipped up, and so you better be on your toes. Like I said, Radford and Winthrop were good. We knew those were good, and so they were our main rivals too. But I thought the Coastal became a really, I want to say, a nasty rivalry in the end because of how it risen in tension. But yeah, that became a big game every year.
Your senior year, you come out, and it's first year on the new field. And I remember being there, and Loyola, Maryland comes in, and they were an outstanding team, and they beat the Camels 2-0 in the first game there. But then all of a sudden, the ball starts flying into the net, and at the end of the year, you're the nation's leading goal scorer, and become Campbell's first Division I men's soccer All-American. What was it different? I mean, 34 goals in 20 games. I mean, what was the difference maybe in the first year? I mean, your first couple of years.
Well, I think, just to be honest, some of the teams weren't as good as in the past.
Was that because State, Carolina, Duke, some of those wouldn't play you?
Yeah, I mean, we played NC State here
Mm-hmm.
that for final year, and we lost. I think I was saying overtime or near the end. I wasn't sure, but we were winning games 8-1, 9-1, 6-0. And then we had obviously the Winthrop, Radfords, and Coastal games that were obviously a lot closer. So that helps when you're playing teams that are not as good as you. And, it was just one of those things where a lot of things went right. And, I had good teammates who looked to get me the ball, and I got it in good positions, and goals just flew in.
Outside of soccer, David, what are some of your best memories and some of the folks that you remember here in the Creek?
I just think the companionship we had with everybody. Everybody knew everybody. Obviously we didn't have cell phones, so we weren't looking down, walking around campus all the time. We were looking up when we knew, hey, how you doing? And you'd have people come by, hey, great game last night. Or you would say to the basketball girls, because they played on campus, hey, great game last night. You guys did good. And, everybody supported everybody. And it was I thought it was just a great family atmosphere around campus, that everybody supported everybody. And that's one of the main things why we had good crowds at our games, because people wanted to come and see basically their friends playing, because we were all friends with everybody.
Throw out a few names here for you and just get your memories. Tell us, Tim Morse was the head coach from 81 through 86. Then he left to go to law school and was attorney in Durham County. Tell us about Tim, and your relationship with him, and what kind of coach he was, and what impressed you most about him.
Well, Tim was very laid back. He allowed us to play the way we wanted to play, like as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't try put a square peg in a round hole. But if he got mad, when he did raise his voice, it had a lot of effect, because he never did that. So when he did raise his voice, it was like, he's serious. We better get our act together. I think, like you said, he let us play. I mean, today's game, you've got to pass it from A to B and B to C and C to, there's a lot of going sideways in today's game.
Mm-hmm.
But we just went forward. It was get the ball forward as quick as we could, and he allowed the individuals to be individuals, use what they had, as long as they didn't abuse it. And but the one thing about Tim, he was a gentleman, and he was like a father figure to a lot of us, especially the ones that didn't have family here. And you could always talk to him. He would always ask you, how you doing? Is there anything we can do for you? And I ended up babysitting for him, for his kids sometimes when him and his missus wanted to go somewhere. But he was just a gentleman, and obviously a scholar too. He went on to be law school.
Attention Camel fans, join the Fighting Camel Club and support our student athletes like never before. Your donations go directly to funding life-changing scholarships, helping our athletes reach their goals on and off the field. As a Fighting Camel Club member, you'll get exclusive perks like limited edition merchandise, early ticket access, and the chance to watch Campbell home games from the exclusive Fighting Camel Club End Zone Suite at Barker Lane Stadium, or pregame with us at our exclusive hoop room before our basketball games. Don't wait. Head to gocamels.com and click on the Fighting Camel Club button at the top of the page to join today. We make a difference for our students when we do this together. Go Camels!
So, David, a few years after you came to the States, you played a big role in helping another future Big South Player of the Year, Shawnee Payne, come to Vance Academy. Tell us a little bit how that came about.
Yeah, after I was in college, a couple of the lads I'd played high school with asked, did I know anybody else? Because the school had said they wouldn't mind taking another soccer exchange student. And I just said, I'll ask and see. I knew a few lads there. And probably after like a couple of days thinking about it, I thought of Shawnee Payne, just because I felt like he had the mentality to do it. And so I talked to him. I talked to his parents, and like he said and like I said, what do you have to lose? And so if he didn't like it, I assured him that if he didn't like it, he could turn around and say, I'm out, and they would fly him back, whenever they got a ticket. So other people in the area wanted me to pick someone else, and I knew that a few of the other kids, and I just didn't think they would have the mentality or to just be able to get along with the people that were here to do it. It's not saying we're special, but it does take something special to leave home at that age and blend in as well as we both did. So he talked to his parents and said, his dad said the same thing I did. Well, if you want to go, you can go, and you can always come back. And that's basically how it worked. But I wanted them to put him in as a sophomore, because I had a pretty good inclination I could get him here for my senior year and his freshman year, but they put him in as a sophomore. I wanted him to go in as a junior like me, and unfortunately we missed out on having him here my senior year.
But down the road, both of you are Big South Conference Hall of Famers. How cool is that a guy that lives around the corner or down the street from you, both of you end up coming to the same high school, the same college, and then you're honored by the same league as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with how we grew up. The people that were around us growing up, kept us grounded. And, I'm sure he did, like I did. We got a lot of stick from our friends. Oh, if we were playing on the street and you'd mess up, they say, oh, look at that, you're an American, you're playing in America and stuff like that. But, I think the support he had and I had from the people close to me was a big key in just making it enjoyable and relaxed, like we're playing on the street, back home with all our friends. And it just made it easy to play and enjoy the time we had here and in the high school.
A person who is incredibly identifiable with Bowie's Creek for almost all of his 64 years, Barry Howard, was your assistant coach while you were playing here.
Yeah, but Barry was, again, laid back. But Barry would just come up to you on the side and just have a word with you, like, hey, you need to, he's kind of like, he was an excellent assistant, he'd put his arm around you when things were not going well. He would try to get you going, but he would always say the right thing. And if you had an issue and you maybe didn't want to go to Tim to talk about it, you could go to Barry, because he would just listen to you. He had no favorites. He would listen to anybody and everybody and try to help you out as best he could. But he was a legend.
Speaking of legends, this next person I'm going to ask you about was early in her coaching and teaching career when you enrolled at Campbell in 1983, and you've stayed in touch with her the last 5 decades. Wanda Watkins.
Yeah, I mean, I think her recognition portfolio says enough, everything that she's done here. And I think part of it was because we all supported the girls' basketball team. And so we got to know not just the players, but we got to know Wanda too. Plus she was a teacher here. Mm-hmm. So I took some classes of hers. And, but she, how many kids on campus today can say that they can go talk to the football coach or the basketball coach now the way we did back then, and, you learn something from, anytime, since I've gone into coaching, you look back on people you've been around and you try to take bits and pieces from even basketball or the baseball coaches. You kind of look at them and you see how they handled certain situations, and does she get annoyed? And I never seen Wanda get annoyed too much on the bench. And the players talk highly of her, kind of the way, Tim did for us. She would do whatever it takes to help the kids out and make sure they were doing all right. And, and obviously she was an excellent coach.
1987, when you graduate, obviously well pre-MLS, outdoor pro soccer options in the States, not very big. You're drafted by the Kansas City Comets indoor team. What made you decide to stick around and give the indoor game a go? Were there options to go back home and play in Europe at all?
Yeah, that's what the plan was to go back, because when I was 16 and 17, I'd had a tryout with Wolverhampton Wanderers, and I was there for like 2 days, and we got snowed out, so it ended. And that was the plan, was to go back and play somewhere in Ireland, and then hopefully maybe be seen again and go back, get a chance in England. But Tim called me into the office in the spring of 87 and goes, hey, do you want to go to this indoor thing? And I'm like, what's indoor? And he said, they're having this tryout thing in Cleveland where they're inviting all the best players in the country to come in, and, and the draft is at the end of the week of tryouts. And I said, sure, why not? I'll give it a go. Again, with if I don't go, I wonder what if. But if I go, I know I'll have a good time. So I went, and they split us up into 4 teams. And there was myself and 3 Fresno State guys were on a team. We were the only Division I players, and the rest were Division II and III. There was only like 13 or 14 on each roster. And 2 of the teams were supposedly all the big guys, all the All-Americans, the Dukes, the Carolinas, the UCLA guys, all that. And we hammered them, because we played each team every night. And then the last night, we went to the Cleveland Coliseum, where the Cleveland Crunch played, Cleveland Force back then. And their game was being televised, so we were first. Our game finished like 8-7. It was a great game. Their game, which was televised, finished like 2-1. It was awful. Mm-hmm. And so we went out after the game, obviously, and met up in the draft the next morning. Nobody had really talked to me. And so I'm just sitting there with a bunch of the other lads, and they say, with the 3rd pick, the Kansas City Comets select me. And I was as shocked as anybody. And then I got to talking to them, and again, it was, well, I'll give it a go and see what it's like. If I don't, I can always go home. And for the first 5 months of the season, I was on the developmental reserve team. And then in February, but one of the assistant coaches always worked with me a couple of times a week on getting used to the indoor game and keeping me in shape, because I wasn't playing games, just keeping me fit. And then in February, they signed me to a 10-day contract. And then after the 10-day contract, they signed me to another 10-day contract. And then after that contract, they either had to sign you for the rest of the season or put you back on they signed me for the rest of the season. And I played 19 games, I think. I had 12 goals and 7 assists or something. And I won Rookie of the Year there was 52 games, so playing almost a third this season. And then from then on, it just took off.
Indoor soccer, for those who aren't as familiar with it, played basically on an ice hockey rink. Smaller numbers of players on the field, on the turf. How did your game translate to that, Paddy, from playing, on a 75 by 120 field?
Well, I mean, it was obviously a lot different. I mean, it wasn't like when you lost the ball as a forward, you could just stay up there and wait for it to come back. If their goalkeeper has the ball and I'm defending you, you might just take off down the other end of the floor to create space and take me with, and I had to go with you. Mm-hmm. So it was a lot of up and down. Your shifts were about a minute long. And if you stayed on too long, you would get, so you go off and a fresh guy come on and I'm tired, and up and down you go, and you would get caught and you'd give up a goal or an assist or something to the guy you're marking. So it took a while to get used to having to stay with your runner type thing. And, but once you practiced it every day, it became second nature to you to just do what you needed to do. And then when there was a lot of movement, obviously, and I played with some guys in Kansas City that were kind of like post-up players. You just dumped the ball in the corner to them and let them hold it, and then you'd make runs off of them. And if your defender went with you, he'd play it somewhere else. If he didn't, then they'd find you. So you just had to make those runs, and that's what I did the first few years. I just made those runs, and they found me and started scoring goals.
What was it that kept you in the game? 17-year indoor pro career. What was it that kept you wanting to come back another year as you moved from Kansas City to St. Louis, then ultimately to the Dallas Sidekicks?
The one thing that kept me going was I was still decent at it. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't, I was one of the top scorers in the league every year. So why should I go get a regular job when I can do this? And, and it's a lot better, working 2 hours a day than working 8 hours a day. And it just kept going until I think in 2003, I decided, well, maybe I need to look for something else. And that's when I started to work I had a North Carolina teaching certificate. And then I went and took the test to get my Texas teaching certificate, and then got out in 2004.
Along the way, you've seen the growth of soccer in the country. Coming here first in 1981, where it was in many ways a niche sport. There was certain places where it was very popular, certain places where it was growing and in popularity. When you look back here over the last 40 plus years that you've been in the country and see, the World Cup in '94 and the impact of the growth of the game, what are your thoughts when you see, where we were here in the States with the game versus where we are now here in 2024?
Well, I think, it always had the possibilities of being big. Mm-hmm. You look at the old NASL, and you look at the players they brought over for that, like the Pelés, the Beckenbauers, and numerous other World Cup stars that played, and it just wasn't run right. Mm-hmm. And I think it was just took that a little bit extra effort not to go big to begin with. Started off, after the World Cup, 2 years after the World Cup, the MLS started. And it kind of grew slowly, which was good. It wasn't just dump all this money in and then nobody shows up. And, so, I mean, I knew if they did it right that they could have a good league here because there was enough people. And then obviously our generation, our kids are playing and their kids are playing. And, it was just a matter of hitting it at the right time. And because there was a lot of kids playing, but they didn't have any teams to follow, so it's come a long way. I will say that it's come a long way, but it still has a long way to go. Right. There's still a high ceiling for this country to get good. And with all their national team players now playing overseas, that's something that the young kids can look at. I say, I can do what Pulisic did. I can do what Ronaldo did. I can do what other players did. They have somebody to look up to, which is back then they didn't.
You enter the coaching ranks. You've got a young family at that time, and as it turns out, your oldest, Connor, is quite the soccer player, and ends up playing in England and playing at different levels of the U.S. national program. Tell us a little bit about what was it like to go from the player to the father of the player?
Yeah, I mean, since he was young, he always, I took him to training with me, and obviously he went to all the games, and, you take a 5 or 6 year old to an indoor soccer game or an indoor anything, the last thing they want to look at is what's going on the field. Mm-hmm. You worry about, hey, don't be up them stairs, don't be. But he just stood there and was glued to the game. He would watch it. And so I knew he had a passion for it, and I just let him play. I think I coached him for one. I always said I didn't want to coach my kids, and I had to coach him 1 year because the coach left. His club coach left and went to another club, and I was kind of his assistant. So I said, I'll take it for 1 year, but I'm only doing it for one. And so yeah, he played, and he went over to Derby on a training session, and then he came back, and then he graduated early from high school. He had a scholarship to Creighton, so he was up in Creighton for the spring semester. And then he went back. I said, well, why don't you ask him, can you go back and train with them in preseason to get ready for Creighton's for your freshman year? And he did that, and then they asked to sign him. So he had a decision to make. Do I go to school and then go, or do I sign with Derby and take a chance? And, the decision was his. He did what he wanted to do. I stayed out of it. And, he asked me, I said, well, son, you can always get your education. I said, you can even do your education while you're playing. So that would be my advice. That's all I said to him. I said, your decision is, because I know what I went through to make my big decision. It had to be his decision, what he wanted to do. And he chose to go.
What is the satisfaction? What do you get out of the greatest joy you get out of coaching and teaching, David?
In high school, you see these freshman kids coming in, kind of, they're playing club soccer, and they're, you're like, and I tell them, I don't care who you play for and what you do for them. I said, when you come to play for me, you'll do what I ask you to do. And don't ever say to me, well, this is what my club team coach wants me to do. And don't ever tell your club coach, well, this is what my high school. I said, you do what he wants you to do for your team, and you do what I want you to do for our team. And you just see the kids grow to be, from skinny freshmen to, good players. And, you just teach them how to be good kids. They come, as a freshman, and they're lost. And, we got 3,200 kids in our high school. So they're kind of lost as they're walking around, and to when they're seniors, and you've seen them grow into be good young men before they go off to college. And it's just satisfactory to know that you've had a part in their growing up, and you've seen they've turned out to be good kids, and you had a help in that.
Well, and you helped send a player or two over here to Campbell through the years as well.
Yeah, Landon Doyle, he's I think he's going to redshirt this year, but he's if he sticks with it and stays, and he'll be I think he'll be a good player for this team. And he's another, he has a twin brother, and two of them came, and they're both great kids, and I think he has the right attitude, and that's the thing. You kind of, not all the kids in your high school go on to play college soccer, so you try to help them out, and you tell them what you went through, you tell them what your experiences were, and you say, look, and you go from high school to college, you go from the top of the ladder to the bottom of the ladder, and you have to work your way up. And if you're fortunate after college that you've reached the top of the ladder, then you go to the pros, you get back down to the bottom of the ladder, and you have to make your way up. And sometimes you go up a step and down two, but you've got to work to keep climbing that ladder. It's not going to be easy. I think a lot of kids today think it's because they're superstars in their high school or their club team, they can just walk in and get all the playing time they want at the next level. But it doesn't work that way.
David, you had a distinguished career, and the honors come as they do, and you're a member of the Campbell Athletics Big South Conference and Indoor Soccer Halls of Fame. What does that recognition mean to you?
It just means that the work you put in was recognized in the end. I think, I took pride in what I did. Every year that I went into a preseason, whether it was here or in Kansas City or in Dallas, I knew there was somebody coming to take my job. And so I knew that if I wanted to play and play a lot, that I had to work harder than everybody else. Those guys that were looking to take my position. So it was just a recognition that, hey, the work you put in and the effort and the longevity paid off in the end. And, those type of things will come if you do the right things.
Through the years, you've been a regular visitor back into North Carolina and Buies Creek. And what do you think when you look around this campus now versus when you and see what it's like? You were just here for homecoming and the football game and all the activities going along with that. Before that, you were here for a soccer alumni weekend. What do you think when you're walking around campus now versus when you first saw it 42 years ago?
Well, it's a lot different. The Grok is gone, but that was kind of like a meeting place where people just hung out and chatted. You don't see many big groups of kids walking around like there used to be. There used to be 5 or 6 of us walking around, or 5 or 6 other people walking around together. I noticed that you don't see many students interacting as those groups walking around campus like we did, and I think that showed in when we played games. Everybody knew everybody. Now it's kind of like everybody's on their own and they have their phones, and that's how they communicate, whereas we communicated talking to each other. But the buildings, the school, how it's developed, it's unbelievable compared to what we had. And I mean, that's usually one of the biggest talking points when we get together, is how much things have changed. And we go, you can imagine if we had that when we were here, how different and it would have been. So, but
I know I sit around sometimes and I think, even myself, would I've ever imagined that we'd have a Division I football team, that we'd have a medical school in Buies Creek, all those things, and you kind of shake your head and then you think that there's a whole lot of possibilities out there.
Yeah, I mean, like when we were here, the law school was one of the best law schools in the country, and then I think our last year, the pharmacy school started, and my roommate, Larry Henson, his wife, Lynn, was one of the first. She was in the first graduating class. And so you knew that educational-wise, this place was special. And then, all the other schools that have come along since then that people come flock to because of how good they are. But I think Campbell is caught up with the times. I think that's with their schools and their buildings and the football team and the facilities for athletics it's just, it draws people in now because they're so good.
Finally, David, can you put into words how Campbell University and the Belize Creek community have impacted your life?
Yeah, I think coming here as a 17-year-old, almost 18-year-old, you're kind of like wet around the ears. You not know what to expect. You're on your own, And although I'd been on my own for the 2 years in high school, but I had a family that I went home to every night. But this place, it kind of made you who you are. You had to deal with a lot of stuff. You had to overcome some challenges. You had great times that you remember. But I wouldn't trade the 4 years here for anything. That's how good it was.
I'm Stan Cole, and our guest today on Tales from the Creek has been Campbell soccer great David Doyle. Thank you, David, for sharing your Tales from the Creek.
Thanks for having me, Stan.